The Galactic Council of Existential Safety had precisely 3,962 regulations concerning things you absolutely should not do if you valued your continued existence. Humans were currently violating 88 of them before breakfast. This wasn't warfare, this wasn't some catastrophic accident or rogue AI scenario. This was recreation. And Councillor Vrix Themble of the Quentarian Oversight Committee was about to have what his species called a catastrophic logical cascade, which is a very polite way of saying his brain was melting. Let me understand this correctly. Vrix Themble's 3 eye stalks vibrated independently, each focused on a different section of the report hovering before him. These creatures are deliberately exposing themselves to ionizing radiation. For fun. Technically, sir, they call it getting a tan. His assistant, a gelatinous blob named Quandip, rippled nervously. Though that particular example is classified under Experiment 63, solar radiation exposure. I was referring to Experiment 12, home ionization studies. They build devices that accelerate particles in contained fields. Weapons research. No, sir. They heat food with them, in boxes, in their kitchens. They call them microwaves, and there are approximately 2 billion of these devices on Earth, right now, unsupervised. Vrix Themble made a sound like a garbage disposal trying to process a spoon. Next item. Experiment 33. Domestic culture of lethal microorganisms. They're weaponizing plagues, shut down the planet. Actually, sir, they drink it. They create controlled environments where bacteria produce ethanol and then they consume it, voluntarily, for pleasure. They call it brewing beer, and consider it a hobby suitable for children to give their fathers on gift-giving occasions. The councillor's leftmost eye stalk went completely limp. I need sedation. We tried sedating the research team, sir. It didn't help. If anything, they became more agitated after viewing human activities. This conversation was happening approximately 8,000 light-years from Earth, in a space station that looked like someone had tried to build a government building out of chrome and anxiety. The Galactic Council of Existential Safety, or GCES, because even aliens love acronyms when they're terrified, had been monitoring dangerous activities across the galaxy for approximately 6 million years. They had very good data on what constituted things that make species go extinct. Humans had somehow turned that entire database into a recreational catalogue. Continue, Vrix Themble whispered, his voice like a defeated accordion. Quandip's gelatinous form flickered through several colors that indicated extreme discomfort. Experiment 19. Uncontrolled chemical combustion in residential areas. Humans fill metal containers with explosive propellant, then ignite them, deliberately, while standing very close. Military exercises. Birthday parties, sir, for children. They put these combustion devices on sugar-based food items and have juvenile humans extinguish them with their breath. The closer the juvenile's face to the flame, the more successful the ceremony. I want to die. That's statistically more likely to happen to them, sir. Yet they continue doing it. The report stretched on for 360 pages. Each page made Vrix Themble question his life choices more than the last. By page 60, he had developed a nervous tic in his middle eye stalk. By page 120, he had started drinking the Quentarian equivalent of whiskey, which was actually just very cold water. But for a species that lived in near boiling temperatures, it had the same effect. Experiment 41. High-altitude gravitational exposure. Humans threw themselves off mountains with fabric attached to their backs. Experiment 59. Deep pressure immersion. Humans strapped metal cylinders to their bodies and descended into crushing ocean depths where nothing should live. Experiment 72. Voluntary ingestion of capsaicin. They ate plants that had evolved specifically to not be eaten, and then competed to see who could eat the most. Sir, Quandip interrupted his ninth whiskey water, there's something you need to understand about the classification system. What now? These 88 experiments? They're just Category 1. Vrick's Themble's drink container fell to the floor with a sad little clink. There are more categories. Category 1 is defined as activities likely to cause individual death. There are also Category 2, activities likely to cause community death, and Category 3, activities likely to cause planetary extinction events. And humans are currently engaging in 93 Category 2 activities and at least 6 Category 3 events, possibly 7. We're still trying to confirm whether nuclear power plant operator training qualifies as recreation or employment for them. The distinction appears culturally blurred. This is impossible. No species could be this suicidal and still exist. That's what we thought, sir. So we sent an observation team. The observation team had consisted of 4 highly trained xenobiologists from different species, each selected for their ability to remain calm under pressure. 3 of them had requested immediate retirement after the first week. The 4th had converted to a small religious sect that believed the universe was actually a practical joke being played on them by a bored deity. Their field reports read like horror novels, written by someone having a nervous breakdown. Team leader Klix Vander, a Thremian with 6 PhDs in dangerous behavior analysis, had filed his first report from a human educational institution called a high school. The report was mostly coherent until he reached the science fair. Day 3 of observation, maintaining cover as exchange student advisor. Have identified what humans call science fair. Initial assessment suggested this would be a formal academic proceeding showcasing theoretical research. Assessment was catastrophically incorrect. He had watched a 16-year-old human named Jasper Kowalewski present a project involving concentrated sulfuric acid, metallic sodium, and something called a really big cooler. The project had won 3rd place. 3rd. Klix Vander had barely restrained himself from triggering the emergency evacuation beacon when Jasper casually mentioned he'd done most of the dangerous stuff in his garage, unsupervised, while his parents were out getting pizza. The juvenile explained his project received lower marks because it wasn't as cool as the first-place winner, a female juvenile named Penelope Harding, who had successfully created a magnetic containment field for ionized plasma. She was 17. She built it in her bedroom. When questioned about safety protocols, she assured me her parents had made her move it to the basement after the first incident. There was a first incident. The second-place winner had genetically modified bioluminescent bacteria to glow in different colors based on environmental toxins. The human education supervisor had praised this as showing real initiative and much safer than last year's project. Klix Vander had been too terrified to ask what last year's project involved. His second report came from something called a community garden, requesting immediate extraction. Possible exposure to biological warfare scenario. Arrived at location designated Maplewood Community Garden, expecting agricultural observation. Found instead what appears to be unregulated bioengineering facility. The gardeners, humans who did this for fun on weekends, were casually discussing the cultivation of plants that could kill you if prepared incorrectly. Rhubarb leaves, toxic, tomato stems, poisonous, apple seeds contained cyanide, and these humans were just growing them next to their houses where their children played. An elderly human female named Gertrude Pemberton had explained her hobby of companion planting, which apparently meant putting plants together based on which ones would help each other grow. This sounded reasonable until she started discussing her foxglove garden. Foxglove, a plant so toxic it had hospitalized people for just touching it. And she grew it because the bees like it and it looks pretty next to the columbine. When I attempted to express concern about the toxicity, Klixvander wrote, his handwriting noticeably shakier, the elderly female laughed and said, "Well, you just don't eat it, dear." She then offered me a jar of her homemade jam. I am currently having the jam analyzed for biological weapons. She made it in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she prepares food for consumption. I can no longer distinguish between recreation and suicide attempts. But the true breaking point, the moment that had sent 3 of the 4 team members running for the nearest therapy planet, had come from their visit to what humans called a ham radio convention. Xenobiologist Prella Nome's final report was just 2 pages long, and the first page was her formal resignation. They're building radio transmitters in their basements, high-frequency, high-power transmission equipment without any central oversight. There's a human male named Douglas Fairweather who showed me his setup proudly. He's bouncing signals off the ionosphere for fun, to talk to other humans doing the same thing. Some of them communicate by bouncing signals off the moon. She had watched Douglas, a retired accountant who looked like somebody's friendly grandfather, casually discuss his antenna array, an antenna array he had built himself on his roof using electricity, lots of it. He had somehow convinced the local power company this was normal. When I suggested this seemed dangerous, Prella Nome's report continued, he laughed and said, "Oh, you should meet my friend Alberto. He does microwave transmission." Then he showed me pictures of Alberto's equipment. Alberto is bouncing microwave energy across several kilometers to send data for fun. He called it ham radio on hard mode. I am now certain humans have no survival instinct. The 4th xenobiologist, Tom Quirrell, hadn't filed a resignation. He had filed something much worse, a philosophical treatise. After 3 weeks embedded in human recreational activities, his paper began, I have concluded that the Galactic Council's framework for understanding dangerous behavior is fundamentally flawed. We have been asking the wrong question. We keep asking, why do humans do dangerous things? The correct question is, why do we think these things are dangerous? This paper had caused significant controversy in the GCES, primarily because Tom Quirrell's arguments were uncomfortably persuasive. Consider Experiment 79, Controlled Avalanche Navigation. Humans strap wooden planks to their feet and slide down mountains covered in frozen precipitation at high velocity. We classify this as suicidal. But in 3,000 years of recorded human skiing, the species has not gone extinct. We must recalibrate our models. The paper got worse from there, or better, depending on who was reading it. Experiment 51. Domestic fermentation. Humans culture bacteria in their homes, not in sterile laboratory conditions, in jars, on their countertops, where they eat. They do this to vegetables. They intentionally rot vegetables and then consume them. We classified this as Experiment 51. High-risk pathogen cultivation. They call it pickling and kimchi and sauerkraut, and their grandmothers teach them how to do it. Tom Quirrell had attended a preserving workshop where a human named Gladys Finchweather, 83 years old and 4'9", had explained her 60-year career of putting up preserves. She grew produce in soil, which contained thousands of microorganisms, picked it with her bare hands, cross-contamination vectors, brought it into her kitchen, unsterile environment, boiled it, inadequate sterilization by galactic standards, and sealed it in glass containers, potential anaerobic bacterial growth environments. Mrs. Finchweather has been doing this for 60 years, Tom Quirrell wrote. She has never once made herself ill. She gives jars of preserved food as gifts. Gifts. She is sharing what we would classify as potential biohazards, and the recipients are grateful. They say things like, "Oh, Gladys's jam is the best, and I hope she brings her pickles to the church potluck." A church potluck, I have learned, is an event where hundreds of humans share food prepared in unsupervised home kitchens. It is considered a social highlight. The paper had landed on Vrix Thembel's desk with a note from the GCES Science Directorate. We can't refute his methodology, but we also can't accept his conclusions without fundamentally restructuring our entire civilization's approach to safety. Please advise. Vrix Thembel was not prepared to advise. He was barely prepared to exist at this point. Quandip, he said slowly. Do we have any humans in custody? Anyone we can actually ask about this? Custody seems inappropriate, sir. They haven't actually violated any laws. They haven't even violated any laws on their planet. Most of these activities are completely legal on Earth. Some are encouraged. Then find me a human who can explain this. Which is how, 3 weeks later, Councillor Vrix Thembel found himself sitting across a table from Margaret Ann Kowalski, aged 67, retired chemistry teacher from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and, according to her immigration documentation, hobbyist, soap maker, and fermentation enthusiast. Margaret Ann had grey hair in a sensible bun, wore a cardigan with small flowers embroidered on it, and carried a handbag that contained approximately 4 items the GCES had classified as dangerous chemical precursors. She had been very confused by the armed escort that had intercepted her cruise ship. So, she said, accepting a cup of tea that had required 6 different safety clearances to approve, you want to know about my hobbies? Mrs. Kowalski. Ms. Kowalski, actually. Never married, too busy with my work and my projects. Miss Kowalski, yes, we need you to explain. Vrix Thembel gestured at the stack of reports. All of this. Margaret Ann pulled reading glasses from her cardigan pocket and picked up the first report. She read for approximately 90 seconds, then looked up with an expression of polite confusion. This is a list of hobbies. We're aware they're hobbies. That's the problem. I don't understand the problem. The problem, Ms. Kowalski, is that you are doing things that could kill you. Well, yes, she said reasonably, if you do them wrong. That's why you learn how to do them right. That's rather the point of hobbies. You get better at them over time. But why? Margaret Ann considered this question with the patience of someone who had spent 40 years explaining atomic structure to 14-year-olds who didn't want to be there. Because it's interesting, she offered, and useful, and satisfying. I make soap because store-bought soap irritates my skin. I ferment vegetables because they taste better and last longer. I grow herbs because I like fresh basil on my pasta. These aren't dangerous activities, dear. They're just life. You are culturing bacteria in your kitchen. Yes, dear. How do you think cheese works? Vrix Thembel's middle eye stalk began to twitch again. Cheese, yogurt, sourdough bread, wine, beer, vinegar, soy sauce. Quite a lot of human food is made by carefully controlling bacterial or fungal growth. We've been doing it for thousands of years. It's one of the safest forms of food preservation, actually, because the good bacteria prevent the bad bacteria from growing. That is not how the galactic classification system describes it. Well, your classification system might need updating, Margaret Ann said tartly. I've been making sourdough starter for 32 years, using the same culture my grandmother gave me. If it was going to kill someone, it would have done so by now. What about... Vrix Thembel scrolled frantically through reports. This, Experiment 68, domestic production of caustic hydroxide solutions. Oh, soap making. Yes, I do that. You need lye, which is sodium hydroxide. You can buy it at the hardware store. You can buy it? Of course. It's also useful for cleaning drains, though you do need to be careful with it. I always wear gloves and safety glasses. And this is recreational? Very much so. Last year I made lavender oatmeal soap for all my colleagues. They loved it. I use goat milk for the base. You have to freeze the milk first, otherwise the lye heats it up too fast and it turns orange and smells terrible. Learned that lesson the hard way. She chuckled at the memory. Vrix Thembel stared at her. This cheerful grandmother in a flower cardigan was casually discussing exothermic reactions involving strong bases, as if she was describing her gardening technique. which, according to another report, also involved things that could kill you. And you teach other humans to do this? Oh yes. I ran a workshop series at the community center before I retired. Very popular. We had a waiting list. A waiting list. To learn how to make caustic chemicals. Well, when you put it like that, you make it sound dangerous. It is dangerous. Only if you're careless, Margaret Ann said primly, which is why proper education is important. I taught safety protocols first. Always add lye to water, never water to lye. Work in a well-ventilated area. Keep vinegar nearby in case of splashes. Basic common sense. There is nothing common or sensible about this. Margaret Ann set down her teacup with a small clink that somehow conveyed profound disappointment. Young man, I'm 600 years old. You seem to be operating under the mistaken impression that humans are doing these things recklessly. We're not. We're doing them carefully. There's a difference. Yes, soap making involves lye. But it also involves following a recipe, doing calculations, checking temperatures, and respecting the materials you're working with. That's not dangerous. That's chemistry, which I taught for 40 years without a single serious injury to any student. Your students made soap. Among other things, we also made biodiesel, extracted DNA from strawberries, grew crystal gardens, and did a very popular unit on the chemistry of cooking. The principal tried to shut down my baking soda and vinegar volcano demonstration 3 times because he thought it was too dangerous. I told him the cafeteria was serving food that was statistically more likely to harm students than any of my experiments. You built volcanoes. Simulated volcanoes, dear, using an acid-base reaction to produce carbon dioxide gas. It's very impressive and completely harmless. The students loved it, though we did have to do it outside after Timothy Braxton used too much vinegar and it overflowed onto the carpet. The smell took a week to fade. Quandip, who'd been silently recording this conversation, made a sound like a washing machine having an existential crisis. Ms. Kowalski, Fricks Themble said carefully, do you understand that the Galactic Council has classified 88 distinct human activities as too dangerous for any species to attempt? I heard that, yes. It seemed a bit dramatic. We are not being dramatic. We are trying to prevent extinction. Whose extinction exactly? Everyone's. Margaret Ann pursed her lips. Let me see that list again. She spent several minutes reading through the classification documents, occasionally making small sounds or clicking her tongue. Finally, she looked up. I do, or have done, approximately 60 of these activities. My neighbor does at least 30 more. Between my book club members, we probably cover 95% of this list. You're in a book club? Yes, we meet every Tuesday. We read mysteries mostly, though last month we did a biography of Marie Curie. Fascinating woman. Discovered radium and polonium, you know. Died of radiation exposure, of course, but her work was revolutionary. Her lab notebooks are still radioactive. And you find this inspiring? Well, yes, she made tremendous sacrifices for science. Though we do take better safety precautions now. When I visited her lab in Paris, this was during my vacation in '98, they had it all sealed up properly. You could look, but not touch. Very sensible. Fricks Themble felt something inside him break. It might have been his will to continue this conversation. It might have been his faith in universal rationality. It might have been his soul. Let me see if I understand your position, he said slowly. You are aware that these activities are dangerous. You acknowledge that they could cause harm if done incorrectly, but you do them anyway because they're interesting. And useful, Margaret Ann added. Don't forget useful. My soap lasts longer than store-bought and doesn't dry out my skin. My fermented vegetables have excellent probiotic benefits. My herb garden saves me money and tastes better than anything from the supermarket. And honestly, dear, it's just nice to make things with your own hands. Very satisfying. But you could die. I could die crossing the street, or eating contaminated food from a restaurant, or tripping down the stairs, or having a heart attack in my sleep. Life is full of risks. You manage them as best you can, and then you get on with living. That is not a rational approach to existence, isn't it? Margaret Ann tilted her head thoughtfully. What do your people do for recreation? We observe art, experience carefully curated sensory environments, participate in regulated social bonding activities. That sounds very safe. It is safe. That's the point. It also sounds very boring. Quorndip made a sound like a scandalized hiccup. Boring! Vrixthemble's eye stalks quivered with indignation. We have been thriving as a species for 18 million years using these principles. How nice, Margaret Ann said politely. We've only been around for 300,000 years or so, but we've been quite busy. We've explored every corner of our planet, including the bottom of the ocean and the tops of mountains. We've split the atom and mapped our genome. We've sent robots to Mars and probes beyond our solar system. We've written millions of books, composed countless symphonies, and created art that spans every medium imaginable. And yes, we've done quite a lot of it in our spare time. Because it's interesting. There was a long silence. Your species, Vrixthemble said faintly, has only existed for 300,000 years, give or take. We've been monitoring dangerous activities across the galaxy for 6 million years. In that time, we've prevented approximately 12,000 extinction-level events. That's very admirable. Ooh, your species has existed for 300,000 years, and in that time has apparently decided that caution is optional. Not optional, dear, just balanced against other priorities. What priorities could possibly outweigh survival? Margaret Ann smiled. It was a gentle smile, the kind she'd used when a student finally grasped a difficult concept. Progress, discovery, joy, excellence, the satisfaction of mastering something difficult. The pleasure of creating something beautiful or useful, the thrill of understanding how things work, the pride of teaching someone else what you've learned. These are also priorities. But if you die, then I die having lived, having learned things and made things and taught things, having contributed something to human knowledge and human culture. That seems rather better than dying having spent my whole life being careful. Vrixthemble realized, with a horror that went straight through his 3 hearts, that he had no response to this. The Quentarians had no cultural concept equivalent to what this elderly human was describing. They had safety, they had preservation, they had continuation, but did they have whatever this was? Ms. Kowalski, he said quietly, your species terrifies me. I know, dear, but we're really quite friendly once you get to know us. Would you like to see pictures of my soap? I did a lovely swirl pattern in the last batch. The conversation had continued for another 3 hours, during which Margaret Ann had thoroughly explained the principles of soap making, fermentation, gardening, and approximately 20 other hobbies that the Galactic Council had classified as existential threats. By the end, Vrixthemble had developed a stress-induced condition that Quentarian doctors were calling Kowalski syndrome, a state of mental paralysis caused by extended exposure to human logic. Margaret Ann had returned to Earth with a polite thank you letter and a gift basket of homemade soap, jam, and pickled vegetables. The gift basket had required 36 different security clearances and was currently in a hazardous materials containment unit, while the GCES Science Directorate tried to determine if pickled beets qualified as biological weapons. But the real problem, the one that was currently causing a full-scale crisis across multiple star systems, had started approximately 6 weeks after Margaret Ann's visit. Young Quentarians had started asking questions. "Why don't we make things?" asked Thix Premble, a junior data analyst who had been assigned to review the human interview transcripts. "Making things is dangerous," her supervisor explained patiently. "But humans make things all the time, and they haven't gone extinct. They're lucky. For 300,000 years, that's statistically improbable." Her supervisor had no good answer for this. The questions spread, first through the Quentarian youth population, then to other species who had been following the human situation with morbid fascination. On Tremble 9, a planet populated by gaseous beings who communicated through carefully modulated vibrations, a group of adolescents had started experimenting with dangerous vibration frequencies. Frequencies that could, theoretically, disrupt their molecular cohesion. They called it music, after learning humans had a similar concept. Their parents were horrified. The adolescents claimed it made them feel alive. 3 Tremble 9 psychologists had experienced the gaseous equivalent of nervous breakdowns trying to understand this statement. On HFY, a crystalline species that had existed in stable contemplation for 90 million years, began experiencing something they'd never encountered before: boredom. A few radical young crystals had started deliberately growing in suboptimal patterns, patterns that were structurally weaker but aesthetically more interesting. They called it art. The elders called it mass hysteria and tried to ban it. This led to the first HFY rebellion in recorded history, which mostly consisted of crystals growing in increasingly elaborate patterns while their elders vibrated with disapproval in the background. But the real chaos, the event that would later be known as the incident that changed everything, or the day the galaxy stopped making sense, started in a black market on a trade station near the Vorthellen expanse. A Thremian teenager named Jax Wendell had, through a series of questionable decisions and one very bribed customs official, acquired a human hobby kit, specifically a bread-making starter kit, complete with flour, yeast, and instructions for making sourdough bread. Jax Wendell's parents discovered him 3 weeks later in his sleeping quarters, surrounded by bubbling jars of fermenting dough. "What is that smell?" "It's my starter. I named him Frederick. Isn't he beautiful? Look, he's already doubled in size." "It's alive!" "Of course he's alive. That's how fermentation works. The yeast organisms consume the sugars in the flour and produce carbon dioxide and alcohol." "It's fascinating. Watch, if I poke him, he deflates and then rises again." His mother had fainted. His father had triggered the emergency contamination protocols. By the time the hazmat team arrived, Jax Wendell had successfully baked his first loaf of bread. "But it smells good!" he protested as they sealed his room. "And the chemistry is really interesting. Did you know that the longer you ferment the dough, the more complex the flavor becomes? There are hundreds of different bacterial and yeast strains working together in a symbiotic relationship. It's beautiful. It's a biohazard. It's bread. Humans have been making it for thousands of years." The incident had made intersystem news. Images of Jax Wendell's room, with its jars of bubbling sourdough starter, had spread across the galactic network. Most adults viewed it with appropriate horror. The teenagers viewed it with fascination. Within a month, there was a thriving black market in human hobby supplies. Bread-making kits, fermentation crocks, seed packets, soap-making supplies. The more the authorities tried to crack down on it, the more the young beings wanted to try these forbidden activities. On Praxis Station, a Vorthellen named Crest Timbol was arrested for operating an illegal cheese cave, an entire cave full of aging cheese. She'd been charging admission. "It's a business," she argued during her hearing, "and an art. Different bacteria create different flavors. You have to monitor temperature and humidity and turn the wheels regularly. It's complex and challenging, and the results are delicious." "Delicious! You're eating rotted milk." "It's not rotted, it's cultured." "There's a difference. Here, try this aged cheddar I've been working on for 6 months. Get that away from me!" The galactic economy began experiencing unusual fluctuations. Suddenly, there was demand for things that had never been commodities before. Flour. The Thremians didn't even eat flour, but they wanted it, because humans made bread with it, and bread-making had become the galaxy's most popular forbidden hobby. Yeast cultures were changing hands for ridiculous amounts of money. A single packet of active dry yeast, which cost approximately $1 on Earth, was selling for 300 galactic credits in the Outer Rim territories. Seeds. Seeds. Who had ever sold seeds across interstellar trade routes? But now there was a thriving market for tomato seeds, herb seeds, pepper seeds. Young beings across multiple species were trying to grow things. Their horrified parents watched their offspring cultivate plants in soil full of bacteria, using sunlight, radiation, and water, potential drowning hazard. And then someone discovered that humans sold their homemade products on something called Etsy. The galactic network nearly collapsed from the traffic. Handmade soap from Earth, sold by people like Margaret Ann Kowalski, was fetching thousands of credits per bar. Not because it had any special properties, not because it was made from rare materials, but because it represented something that the galaxy had never encountered before: the human concept of making something beautiful and useful just because you could. An elderly human named Gretchen Hofmeister from Portland, Oregon, who made decorative pottery in her garage, woke up one morning to discover she had 3 million back orders from alien species across the galaxy. She thought it was a prank until the first shipment request came through with payment attached. Enough payment to buy a small house. "But it's just pottery," she told the galactic trade representative who materialized in her driveway. "I make it on weekends, for fun." "Yes," the representative said reverently. "We know. Human homemade jam, pickles, hot sauce, soap, candles, jewelry, pottery, woodwork, knitted items, paintings, and approximately 6,000 other categories of crafts had suddenly become the galaxy's most sought-after luxury goods. Not because they were perfect, many had small imperfections that showed they were handmade, but because they were handmade, because someone had taken dangerous materials and through skill and practice and care had created something unique. The galactic economy, which had operated for millions of years on principles of mass production, standardization, and absolute safety compliance, suddenly encountered a market force. It had no framework for understanding. People willing to pay enormous amounts of money for things that were technically less perfect than machine-made equivalents, specifically because they represented someone taking a risk to create something individual. The Galactic Trade Commission called an emergency meeting. "This is unsustainable," declared Commissioner Vreshnok, slamming 3 of his appendages on the table simultaneously. "The market is in chaos. We have stable species spending their life savings on fermentation crocks. Young beings are quitting safe, secure jobs to try this entrepreneurship." "My daughter," said Councillor Rix Themble, no relation to Vrix Themble, though they shared similar eye-stalk twitching patterns, "has started a candle-making business. She's using wax and fragrance oils and fire. She's melting things, creating combustion hazards, and she's making more money than I do after 600 years in government service." "My son," added another councillor sadly, "has opened a bakery. He gets up every morning at 4 a.m. to make bread from scratch. He calls it artisanal sourdough, and there's a line out the door. A line of people willing to pay premium prices for something he makes using bacteria in his kitchen. This is what happens when you expose impressionable species to human influence," Vreshnok declared. "We should have quarantined Earth immediately. Now it's too late. The concept has spread. You can't unteach someone that they can make things." "Are we certain this is a problem?" asked a small voice from the back. Everyone turned to look at junior analyst Presh Kimball, who immediately regretted speaking. "I mean," she continued hesitantly, "our economy is growing at unprecedented rates. Unemployment is at an all-time low because beings are starting their own businesses. Innovation indices are up across all sectors. And beings seem happier." "Happier?" "Yes, sir. Psychological surveys show increased life satisfaction among beings who have taken up what they're calling human hobbies." Or do they report feeling more fulfilled, more accomplished, and more excited about existence? There was a long, uncomfortable silence. "That's not safe," someone muttered. "No," Presh Kimball agreed, "but humans have been doing it for 300,000 years. Maybe they know something we don't." The meeting had devolved into argument after that, with various factions forming around different positions. The traditionalists wanted to ban all human hobby supplies and return to sensible recreation. The progressives argued that beings had a right to choose their own activities, even risky ones. The economists just wanted the market to stabilize because the current volatility was making financial forecasting impossible. Meanwhile, on Earth, humans remained blissfully unaware that they had accidentally triggered a galactic economic and philosophical revolution. Margaret Ann Kowalski was making a new batch of lavender soap. Jasper Kowalewski was building a Tesla coil for his college engineering project. It was much bigger than his high school science fair project. His roommates had asked him to please stop making the lights flicker. Gertrude Pemberton was planting next year's foxglove. The bees would be so pleased. Douglas Fairweather had just made contact with a ham radio operator in New Zealand by bouncing signals off the moon. He'd been trying for 6 months. Success! Gladys Finchweather was teaching her great-granddaughter how to can strawberry preserves. Now remember, dear, always use sterile jars and make sure you hear that little pop when they seal properly. That's how you know you've done it right. Gretchen Hofmeister was in her garage, throwing pottery on her wheel, trying to keep up with the absurd number of orders coming through Etsy. She'd had to hire 3 assistants. She was considering buying a second kiln. At 72 years old, she'd accidentally become a successful small business owner. Her retirement plan was now make pots forever. None of them knew that across the galaxy, young beings were watching human social media videos about bread making, soap making, gardening, woodworking, pottery, and hundreds of other dangerous hobbies with the same intensity that previous generations had watched revolutionary political manifestos. The videos all had similar elements: a human explaining something they loved doing, showing the process, discussing what could go wrong and how to prevent it, displaying the final result with obvious pride, and always emphasizing that they did this for fun, because it was interesting, because making something with your own hands was satisfying in a way that buying something could never be. Hi, I'm Robert Chen, and today I'm going to show you how to make a cutting board from scrap wood. Now, we're going to be using power tools, so safety first. Always wear your safety glasses, keep your fingers away from the blade, and never rush a cut. 3 million beings across 12 star systems watched this video in the first hour. By the end of the week, there was a sudden demand for woodworking tools that baffled every economic analyst in the galaxy. Today we're harvesting honey from my backyard hive. Now these are bees, so yes, they can sting, but if you're calm and gentle, they're actually quite docile. Beekeeping. Several species were now attempting to domesticate their local pollinator insects. The Ecological Safety Commission had filed 6 separate protests. Nobody was listening. Welcome back to my kitchen. Today I'm attempting to make croissants from scratch. This is going to take 3 days because of all the folding and chilling time, but trust me, it's worth it. Croissants. Humans were making croissants at home, a pastry so complex it required days of work and multiple steps involving butter, dairy product, potential pathogen vector, yeast, living organisms, and heat, combustion hazard. And they were doing it because homemade croissants tasted better than store-bought ones. The galaxy was learning a fundamental truth about humans. They would do incredibly difficult things for marginally better results if those results were more satisfying. Not more efficient, not more profitable, more satisfying. This concept had no translation in most galactic languages. The Galactic Council of Existential Safety held another emergency meeting. This one was different. This one included economists, psychologists, sociologists, and a very uncomfortable Vrix Themble, who had been asked to serve as the expert on human behavior, despite his repeated protests that he understood humans less now than he had before meeting Margaret Ann Kowalski. "We need to make a decision," announced Supreme Councillor Orthvek. "The human influence is spreading faster than we can track. We have three options. 1, complete quarantine of Earth and prohibition of all human cultural material. 2, regulated integration, allowing limited human hobby activities under strict supervision. 3, full acceptance and framework restructuring to accommodate human-style risk tolerance." "Option 1 is impossible," said Vrix Themble tiredly. "The information is already out there. You can't uninvent the concept of hobbies. And option 2 would require enormous regulatory infrastructure," added Commissioner Vreshnock. "Who decides which hobbies are acceptable? Where do we draw the line? Is bread-making acceptable but soap-making not? Why? On what basis?" "Which leaves option 3, said Orthvek heavily, "restructuring our entire civilization's approach to safety and risk." "Or," said a new voice, "option 4. Everyone turned to look at Tom Quirrell, the xenobiologist who had written the controversial paper about human hobbies. "We stop thinking of this as a problem to be solved," he continued, "and start thinking of it as a phenomenon to be understood and adapted to. The galaxy is changing. Beings across multiple species are discovering that they want to make things, grow things, create things, even if it's risky, especially because it's challenging. That desire isn't going away. We can't regulate it away. We can't ban it away. So perhaps we should teach beings how to do it safely." "That's just option 2 with better marketing," someone grumbled. "No," Tom Quirrell said firmly. "Option 2 assumes human hobbies are inherently dangerous and need to be contained. I'm suggesting that they're inherently rewarding, and we need to teach beings how to engage with them responsibly, the same way humans do. Humans have accidents. Yes, rarely. But the overwhelming majority of humans who engage in these activities do so safely for their entire lives. Because they learn proper techniques, they respect the materials they're working with, they follow safety protocols, they practice until they're skilled. That's not luck, that's education. You want us to teach beings to do dangerous things. I want us to acknowledge that beings are going to do these things whether we approve or not. The choice isn't between dangerous hobbies and safety. The choice is between dangerous hobbies done recklessly and dangerous hobbies done carefully." Supreme Councillor Orthvek was quiet for a long moment. "You're proposing a complete philosophical shift in how we approach existential safety." "Yes, sir. You're proposing we learn from humans, a species that has existed for a fraction of the time we have." "Yes, sir. Specifically, I'm proposing we learn from Margaret Ann Kowalski, who spent 40 years teaching chemistry to adolescent humans without a single serious injury because she taught safety protocols first and made sure her students understood why those protocols mattered. And if this fails, if beings start dying because we encourage them to take risks, then we'll have failed the same way we've been failing for millions of years, by assuming we can protect beings from themselves. The difference is, this time they'll have died doing something they loved, instead of dying having never tried anything difficult." The room erupted in argument. It went on for hours, days actually. The entire Galactic Council got involved. There were subcommittees, working groups, feasibility studies, risk assessments, cultural impact analyses. In the end, they didn't so much make a decision as acknowledge reality. The galaxy had changed. Young beings, and increasingly not so young beings, had discovered that they could make things, that they could grow things, that they could take raw materials and skill and effort and create something unique and useful and beautiful. And they weren't giving that up. Not for safety, not for tradition, not for anything. 6 months after Margaret Ann Kowalski's visit to the GCES, the Council issued a new framework, the Guidelines for Responsible Engagement with Challenging Activities. It was 3,000 pages long and had one core principle. If humans can do it safely with proper training and equipment, so can everyone else. This led to several immediate developments. First, the creation of the Galactic Hobby Education Network. Beings who wanted to learn human-style activities could now take certified courses taught by instructors who had been trained in safety protocols. The first course offerings included bread making, soap crafting, basic woodworking, container gardening, and introductory fermentation. They filled up immediately. Waiting lists extended for years. Second, Earth became the galaxy's most popular tourist destination. Aliens came specifically to visit human hobby shops, farmers markets, craft fairs, and maker spaces. They watched in fascination as humans casually did things that required 6 safety waivers on their home planets. Margaret Ann Kowalski's soap-making workshop became so popular with alien tourists that she had to hire 3 assistants and move to a larger venue. She was bemused but delighted by this development. Third, the galactic economy underwent a fundamental transformation. Mass-produced goods were still available and still useful, but the premium market now belonged to handcrafted items. Things made by individual beings who had learned a skill and practiced it until they could create something unique. The concept of artisanal spread across the galaxy like a particularly persistent mold culture. Fourth, the Galactic Council of Existential Safety had to hire approximately 6,000 new employees to handle all the requests for hobby activity assessments. Beings kept inventing new activities that weren't in the original list of 88. Candle making, pottery throwing, knitting, wood carving, metalworking, glass blowing. Each one required careful analysis to determine appropriate safety protocols. Vrix Themble, who had somehow become the director of human hobby integration despite his repeated protests that he was spectacularly unqualified for this position, spent his days reviewing proposals for new hobby categories and trying not to have a nervous breakdown. "Someone," he said to Quandip one morning, "wants to start a glass-blowing studio. They want to heat sand to temperatures that can melt flesh and then blow through a tube connected to molten material. Who thinks of these things?" "Humans, sir. Humans thought of it approximately 2,000 years ago. It's apparently quite beautiful when done correctly. And people want to learn this? We have 367 applications for the first workshop, sir." Vrix Themble made his sad accordion sound. But perhaps the most significant change, the one that would reshape galactic culture for the next 1,000,000 years, was philosophical. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy had encountered a species that viewed challenge as opportunity rather than threat, that saw risk as something to be managed rather than avoided, that believed the satisfaction of mastery was worth the danger of learning, and the galaxy, despite itself, was starting to agree. Young Thremians, who had spent their lives in perfectly safe, perfectly predictable careers, were quitting their jobs to open bakeries. Quentarians, who had never questioned their culture's obsession with safety, were signing up for woodworking classes. Crystalline beings on Klixvar were deliberately growing in patterns that made them more fragile but more beautiful. The galaxy was learning to take risks, calculated, educated, careful risks, but risks nonetheless. And beings were discovering something humans had known for 300,000 years, that life felt more alive when you were doing something difficult. That accomplishment meant more when it required genuine effort. That creating something with your own hands, even something imperfect, was more satisfying than buying something flawless that someone else had made. 2 years after the crisis began, Vrix Themble received an invitation. Margaret Ann Kowalski was hosting her annual soap-making workshop and wondered if he would like to attend. He stared at the invitation for 3 full minutes. Then he checked the schedule, requested leave from his duties, and booked passage to Earth. The workshop was held in a community center in Milwaukee on a Saturday morning. 15 students attended, 12 humans, 2 Thremians, and 1 extremely nervous Quentarian named Vrix Themble. "Welcome, everyone." Margaret Ann smiled at the group. "Today, we're going to make cold-processed soap. Now, before we begin, we need to talk about safety. We'll be working with lye, which is sodium hydroxide, a strong base. That means we need protective equipment and proper procedures. Everyone has safety glasses and gloves? Excellent. Remember, always add lye to water, never water to lye. Say it with me. Always add lye to water, never water to lye, the class chorused. Vrix Themble's voice was barely a whisper, but he said it. Perfect. Now let's talk about the chemistry of what we're doing. For the next 4 hours, Vrix Themble learned about saponification, oil ratios, fragrance loads, and color additives. He carefully measured his lye and water. He heated his oils to the correct temperature. He mixed everything together at exactly the right moment. He poured the mixture into a mold, cleaned his workspace, and disposed of materials properly. At the end of the workshop, he had created a bar of soap. It was slightly lopsided. The swirl pattern wasn't quite even, but it was his. He had made it, with his own appendages, following proper safety protocols, yes, but still. He had taken dangerous materials and created something useful. It was the most satisfying thing he had ever done in 600 years of existence. "How do you feel?" Margaret Ann asked him as he packed up his supplies. Vrix Themble looked at his slightly imperfect bar of soap. He thought about the millions of beings across the galaxy who were, at this exact moment, making bread or throwing pottery or planting gardens or engaging in any of the thousands of activities that had once terrified him. "I feel," he said slowly, "like I finally understand." "Understand what, dear? Why you do this? Why humans have always done this? It's not about the danger. It's never been about the danger. It's about the accomplishment, about knowing you can take something difficult and through skill and care and effort create something valuable." Margaret Ann patted his arm. "Now you're getting it. Same time next month, we're doing advanced techniques with natural colorants. I'll be here." He was, and the month after that, and the month after that. Within a year, Vrix Themble had opened his own small soap-making business on his home planet. He called it Kowalski's Legacy, with Margaret Ann's permission. His soaps weren't as perfect as machine-made alternatives. They cost more, took longer to produce, required careful handling of dangerous materials. They sold out within hours of each batch being ready, because across the galaxy, beings had learned something that humans had always known. The things worth doing are usually difficult. The skills worth having are usually dangerous. And the life worth living is usually the one where you take some chances. The Galactic Council of Existential Safety never did change its official classification of those 88 experiments. They remained listed as too dangerous to attempt. But somewhere in the fine print, in an amendment added by unanimous vote, was a new line. "Unless you know what you're doing, in which case, have fun, and please submit documentation of your safety protocols for review." Margaret Ann Kowalski framed a copy of that amendment and hung it in her workshop, right next to the photo of her first class of alien students, all proudly holding their slightly imperfect, absolutely treasured, handmade bars of soap. The universe hadn't ended. It had just gotten significantly more interesting, and somewhere in a small apartment on Quentar 7, an elderly Quentarian carefully measured out flour, water, and a small portion of sourdough starter he'd named Frederick Jr. His eye stalks quivered with concentration as he mixed the dough. His adult offspring, visiting for the weekly meal, stared in horror. "Father, you're culturing bacteria in your kitchen." "Yes," Vrix Themble said calmly, "I'm making bread. Would you like to learn? It's quite satisfying once you understand the chemistry." This is insane. This is a hobby. There's a difference. Now pay attention. I'm going to teach you about gluten development and why kneading technique matters. It's fascinating stuff. Here, put these gloves on. His offspring accepted the gloves with trembling appendages. They would, over the next 3 hours, learn that their father had somehow become both more anxious about specific safety protocols and more relaxed about existence in general, that he smiled more now, that he seemed genuinely happy in a way he never had during his 600 years of government service. By the end of the lesson, they had their own small ball of dough fermenting in a covered bowl. "Now we wait," Themble explained. "It needs time to rise. That's the beautiful part. You can't rush it. You have to be patient. Let the yeast do its work. Come back tomorrow and I'll show you how to shape it. I can't believe I'm doing this. I couldn't either. 2 years ago, this would have seemed like suicide. Now?" He looked at his collection of fermentation jars, his soap-making supplies, his small herb garden growing by the window in carefully monitored soil. Now it seems like living. The next generation of galactic civilization was learning to make bread in their kitchens, to grow plants in dirt, to create soap from caustic chemicals, to throw pottery from clay. They were learning that life wasn't about avoiding every possible danger, but about approaching challenges with respect, skill, and proper safety equipment. They were learning to be more human, and across the galaxy, in a community center workshop, in a suburban garage, in a backyard garden, in a kitchen filled with bubbling fermentation jars, humans continued doing what they had always done. Making things, growing things, creating things, teaching others how to do the same. Not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. And really, what could possibly be more dangerous than that?